make him an offer he can't refuse.
I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Stuff that dreams are made of.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
One morning, I shot an elephant in my pajamas. How he got in my pajamas, I don't know.
I am big. It's the pictures that got small.
Go ahead. Make my day.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Hello and welcome to Front Row Classics, a production of the Front Row network of shows, where we take a look at some of the greatest films ever made. And here's your host, Brandon Davis.
Well, hello to everybody out there in podcast land. This is Front Row Classics with NPR Illinois Community Voices. I'm your host, Brandon Davis. Joining me once again is my co-host, Eric Flick. How's it going, Eric?
It's going really well, Brandon. How are you this fine day?
Doing great. You know, it's December, the holidays are here, and we have one of our favorite people here talking to us today. It's our friend Patricia Ward Kelly, who we talked to last year about An American in Paris, and this year we are talking to her about really, I think, her late husband, Gene Kelly's sort of magnum opus, Singin' in the Rain.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked to a lot of different people about movies, and how many of those people have said, my favorite movie is Singin' in the Rain. I mean, it's probably the most loved movie when we talk to people. That's people's number one movie.
It is our editor-in-chief Jeremy Geckner's favorite movie, and it wouldn't be if I hadn't have introduced it to him in college, so he owes me.
And you mentioned you watch this on a regular basis.
Oh,
too,
I love
right?
it. I love it. It goes back and forth between this and Casablanca for me. It really does. Yeah. So it's great. And Singin' in the Rain was the first episode of Front Row Classics. Wow. Jeremy and I sat down in his music room and recorded the episode and rehashed the plot, and just I think it was more self-indulgent for us than it's been a while since I've gone back and listened to it. I don't know if
it's there though. and everybody wants to go see what the origination of this podcast was. Go check out episode 1, Singin' in the Rain.
Yeah, but we with this conversation with Patricia, though, it's a lot of fun because I think this is a movie most people know. Everybody knows the plot, but so we get to really dive into some deeper aspects of the film.
Sure. And Patricia definitely wanted to make everyone aware of certain aspects of the film. And that comes out pretty clearly. And I think she does an excellent job at that. And she's got the production notes. I mean, she knows this movie inside and out, and Gene's thoughts on it. Where else can you get something like that? That as near firsthand experience to a classic film as you can get.
Yeah, so a lot to unpack in this episode, as well as some very personal reminiscence about Gene. We just don't concentrate on Singin' in the Rain. We get into some other aspects of her relationship with Gene that I think our listeners will really enjoy. So let's just hop into the episode now. And here is our interview with Patricia Ward Kelly. And it is a thrill to welcome back to Front Row Classics our friend Patricia Ward Kelly. How are you?
Well, I'm happy to be here with you, and I like the guy that I see in the back.
I've got a couple. Yeah,
nice to see him in full flight. It's so interesting. He's rarely touching the ground. I find that he's just, and so often just suspended. It's like he's just. A lot of people say he's floating. Flying, I've heard. It's just and everyone always says that it looks absolutely effortless, and he said it was always very, very difficult to make it look so effortless. But that was what he tried to do, because he didn't. If you see the effort, then you don't experience the joy that he's tried to convey. So there was a method to his madness.
Absolutely. And well, we're talking about Singin' in the Rain today, and I've always said that I don't think any other movie in history has captured joy in a bottle quite like Singin' in the Rain has. And it's a movie that has brought me joy even in some of my most darkest times. And so I'm so excited to talk about it. But we haven't talked to you since, I think it was last May when I clocked it. And you've done a lot of traveling since then.
Oh gosh, last May. That feels like
Yes,
that was May 2021.
May 2021. We talked about An American in Paris.
Wow, so
Yeah.
much happened. We managed to do a couple things in COVID during lockdown. It was kind of extraordinary. It seems like it was one of the most fruitful periods in an odd way, because we managed to remount the ballet that Jean created for the Paris Opera in 1960, and we renamed it Starstruck with the Scottish Ballet. And I worked with the artistic director there, Christopher Hampson, who is talk about a joy. I mean, he's just a delight. And then the designer, Les Brotherston, the award-winning designer from the UK. And it was not set to happen until maybe get greenlit in 2024, when I first spoke with Chris about it. And then in January, he called me in January 2021. He said, okay, we're fast tracking this. We're going to open our season with it, because at that point, he didn't even know if they were going to have a season, whether they would be able to open it. And so he thought that opening with Jean's really brilliant ballet to Gershwin's Concerto in F would be a perfect way to do it. So the three of us were on Zoom, just working through the choreography. I have it on, Gene hand wrote it on the music, on the score, and his handwriting is virtually indecipherable. So what I did was we all had it in front of us. Chris and I had it and up on our screens, and I would decipher, and it would be a tap step, a tango step, a classical ballet move, a gymnastics move, just one of the kind of iconic Gene Kelly moves. And then Chris took that and then articulated that and put that on the dancers. And oh my gosh, so we premiered that in the fall in Scotland, and it was amazing. And then I went on, and I'd always wanted, Jean thought a scarf was the perfect accoutrement for a woman or a man, and he thought it was a perfect prop. And so he gave them to me often as gifts. And I'm surprised I'm not wearing one now, although I have kind of a simulated one. But so I always wanted a Jean Kelly scarf, an Hermes scarf. And so I reached out to a friend of mine, the head of France Musique in Paris, and just kind of said, gee, I'd love to have an Hermes scarf for Jean, never thinking it would amount to anything. And unbeknownst to me, he was good friends with one of the heirs in the family in Hermes, and they had lunch the next week. And the next week, I got an email to meet on Zoom with the team at Hermes. And so we managed to release the homage to Jean Kelly scarf in July. And then I spent most of the summer in Paris writing an 8-part radio series called Jean Kelly et moi for France Musique, and those podcasts are available. I tell you, it is better if you do speak French, because if you speak English only, it's quite distracting, because the French voices come over, and Jean is speaking to me in these recordings in English, and so he had to be translated. And I'm hoping to release an English version, and then you'll be able to hear that. And so it's been, so 3 kind of blockbuster thing. Oh, and then I got to go to forgot to mention, I got to go to the Cannes Film Festival for the 70th anniversary of Singin' in the Rain, the movie that we're talking about today. And it was really it was very moving. And I presented the film in the Agnes Barda Theater, and Agnes was a dear friend of Jean's and of mine, as was her husband, Jacques Demy. And at the very last minute, I was there with the lovely Warner Brothers team and Team France Warner Brothers. They were great. And you don't get permission to walk on the red carpet until they give you permission. You can't ask for it. And so I figured, I heard all along that we had not received permission to walk on the red carpet. And at the very last minute, they said that we could. And so we come onto this historic, and the Warner Brothers people were very sophisticated. They knew exactly when to wait and pause so that the red carpet was completely clear and we were the only ones on it. I mean, I would never have dared to do anything like that. I would never have done that. But they were very smart. They just kind of held me back like that, and then we got to walk forward. And of course, as we're there and you turn to each side is just this phalanx of reporters and journalists. And of course, you hear Gene singing on the loudspeakers. And it was pretty moving. But one thing that was especially touching for me was a story that the directors, Jules Dessin, had shared with me about the carpet and the stair that you ascend. And I think that touched me as much as even being there myself, but reflecting on Gene. And at the time, Gene was at the Cannes Film Festival, and Jules Dessin had been nominated and had received Best Director, but it was at the very sad time of the McCarthy era in the 50s, and he was really ostracized. I mean, and so he's told me when I met him here at the LA County Museum, he said that as he started to enter and go in, no one would get near him, and everyone just backed away and as quickly as they could. And he saw Gene coming toward him, and he said that he started to duck away because he didn't want Gene to be embarrassed by any encounter. And he said Gene came up and just grabbed his old arm and said, "What are you doing?" And he took him by the arm and escorted him up and up the stairs. And that to me is the most powerful thing as I thought of it. And I was trying very hard because I had had stair walking training from Gene, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go flying and embarrass him in any way, but also just the power of that moment that made that space even more powerful. So, and the crowd went crazy with Sing in the Rain, obviously, and many had seen it. But it was interesting because I often hear people say, "Oh, it skews old, it'll be an older audience." Well, no, it isn't. I mean, there were young people there in their 20s, 30s who'd never seen it and just loved it. And they just congregated after, and you're not supposed to do that either. I mean, there are all these things that you are not supposed to do. And so, of course, everybody just went flump right around me. And I looked at the Warner Brothers team, and they just gave the okay, and they held everybody back and let all these people line up, and they just said it was okay. Let the crowd gather. So I was really glad that they did that, because it would have been to me very sad if you have all of these really enthusiastic young people. And of course, I had my card to give them with the great Gene Kelly signature on it. And it would have been really sad to me that if what you're trying to do at the Cannes Film Festival is introduce new audiences and bring young people into this experience, that you then, when they show an extraordinary response and this enthusiasm, that you would then kind of go, "Oh, sorry, you can't line up here and just move along." I think that, so once again, Warner Brothers called it beautifully, because they just read the room. And I think it's very important to, I think sometimes the protocol, I appreciate protocol. I appreciate rules and things, but I think sometimes you really do have to read the room and sense what's happening that you did not expect. And one thing they did not expect was young people just coming en masse around. So
would Gene have expected that? I mean, this movie 70 years later, people are still discovering it and still loving it. Was that something that he was aware of?
Well, the last in 1990, we were at the Hollywood Bowl for the 50th anniversary. Is that right?
Would it have been
40th anniversary. I'm just sitting here doing the math because I've been at the 50th, 60th. For the 50th, I was at the Academy of Motion Pictures. The 60th, I was with Rita Moreno in New York. And everybody kept saying, Ms. Moreno, why are people still watching this film after all these years? And she said, because it's a perfect musical, because it's a perfect movie, because it's a perfect movie, period. So, but yes, Gene and I were at the 40th anniversary of Singin' in the Rain. I guess I hope I make it to the 80th. And it was 18,000 people. It filled the bowl, and we were there. We'd just gotten married the month before, and it was pretty amazing and it was not only, I have to say, it was not only Singin' in the Rain, but Gene Kelly on that stage. He had a presence that was just so magnetic and so embracing, I think, and so genuine. And I'll never forget that night. It was just an amazing experience. So yeah, let's see. Okay, 70, I'm 63, so I should make it to 80. That would be, I'd be 73. Then I should make it to 90. That would be 83. Maybe I could make it to 100 if I could live to 103. We'll see. You guys will be around.
And we'll still be talking about this movie.
Yes, we will.
I mean, it's just got an amazing staying power, and it's a perfect musical. And I do want to get a sense of what did Gene realize that? I mean, at the 40th anniversary, was he aware of the staying power of the film that he had helped create?
Well, I think so. I think if you show up and 18,000 people show up, I think that says quite a bit. But I think he always said to me, I'd like to come back in 100 years and see what people are watching. What will people still be watching these movies? And I think with certainly Singin' in the Rain will be there. And I think American in Paris will certainly be there. And oddly, from what I hear on Facebook and Instagram, I have a feeling Brigadoon and Silver Stock and The Pirate and On the Town and a few others will still be there as well. So I think but I don't think, to your question, I don't really believe that Gene knew how big a figure he would be 26 years after he died. I don't think he had a firm sense of that. And I think that was partly one of the most appealing things in his character, which was his humility, that it was not, he never took it for granted. And I think to see all these young kids turn out, and really people of all ages. And today somebody sent me a video. I haven't figured out how to post it, but it's one I've not seen before. It's a cat in a shower with Gene singing in the rain, and the cat's just doing a dance. It's really funny. People always send me dog videos of dogs splashing in the rain, but this was a first to see a cat. But I mean, even during lockdown, it was kind of what you were saying, is that I think Singin' in the Rain served as a piece for people when they were terribly down and feeling terribly lonely, isolated. The one village in the UK, everybody came out of their houses, socially distanced. It was raining, and they put Jean on the boombox, and they all sang and danced in the rain. And that was very early on. That was very early. And I think I got so much mail from people saying that he enabled them to survive. I mean, I think I'm quoting them, so I'm not overstating it. And I think, in fact, I just received a note from a young woman who was from Turkey, who said that the song "Seeing It," there was a kind of spontaneous thing that happened recently that she saw it in it, and she felt that it had really been pivotal in her life, and in saving her life, and in giving her direction to proceed with dignity about herself and have self-esteem. And gosh, what a legacy. So it's not just a movie, it's a whole way of thinking. I mean, Jean said that the purpose was to bring joy. So obviously with you both, he fulfilled that. But I think with these other qualities were things that he did not imagine, that it would be such a life-sustaining feeling for many people, and also just such an inspiration. I mean, the little kids, I get 2- and 3-year-olds, and a friend just sent me a video of her daughter, and she was just sitting there on the sofa. She's 3, and she's watching Sing in the Rain, and she was getting something out of a bowl to eat, but she just forgets. She's just so she just stops in the middle, and in food or popcorn would be so enticing, but she just lost sight of, and that's really I think that's a legacy that he'd be very proud of, and maybe one that he wouldn't anticipate that would be going on this long.
And what I enjoy so much when I watch the movie is it's a wonderful, entertaining slice of Hollywood history. I love learning about the early days of cinema, and it's fascinating to me that when word got around of what this movie was going to be about, it seemed like the whole studio sort of flocked to tell Gene all of these stories of the transition from silent to sound, and the whole studio seemed to be buzzing around that.
Well, everybody, they definitely, at Betty, not only Jean, but Betty Comden and Adolph Green, great writers, that's very true. They did solicit all of the knowledge from all the old MGM guard about sound, and the things that happened, and the taking nails out of the floor, and things with the microphones. And so it is real, and that's really fun, because I think nowadays so much is, in an odd way, I think, particularly in some of the biopics and things, so many things are manufactured, so you don't really know what's true and what's not. And I always think that the way these movies were made is so extraordinary. Why do you feel a need to embellish something that's so magical and miraculous? So I think that's a great part, one of the reasons it's so sustainable. I think also the wit of the writing. I think that it's such a smart script, and very difficult to write something like that I think humor gets dated very quickly. So you kind of cringe. You go, ugh, that's really 70s humor. Ugh, God, that was really 80s humor. And how did they pull it off? That they made it timeless humor and ageless humor. It's not. So a 2-year-old can sit next to a 102-year-old, and they're both laughing.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is really, they pulled off something with that's amazing. And then the storytelling, Gene using movement to tell the story, that worked pretty well too, I'd say.
No, absolutely.
Do you find you were just talking about myths, do you find that, well, it seems like the more famous the movie, the more myths are, surrounding it. And it seems like there's a lot of myths that have been built up about Singin' in the Rain.
Sadly, there's so many. I mean, and some of the ones that are my pet peeves.
Yes.
the audacity to suggest that there's milk in the water, so you see the raindrops. I don't know why I can't stomp that one out. I keep trying, but that it's just remarkable cinematography and lighting to backlight the rain so that you could see the raindrops against the plate glass. And I think I just worked on something where they had managed to get every single myth into the script, and I was just shocked because, but then you realize it's all coming from online. It's all coming from a certain group of books. They're not doing primary research, and they're not going back. And then what happens is it just gets passed from the next one to the next one, and it just gets, so you get these stories, and I can always tell it's like, oh, okay, make them laugh. Okay, Donald O'Connor went to the hospital for 4 days after he shot the number. No, he didn't. And that because the next account will say he went home to bed for 4 days. No, he didn't. He actually finished that and went to another stage to rehearse another number. So, and they said that that they had to redo it. They didn't have to redo it. There's a lot of mythology, and sadly, I think one of the things is that Gene was a very credible source. I think because he's directing, choreographing, and starring in the movie, he has to keep track of the rehearsal schedule, the production schedule, the budget, the costumes, the music, the sets, all of the participants, all of the work, basically. So he's monitoring everything, and he has to keep that on schedule and on budget. And so, and there are 2 sets of production notes, and I brought one here for you. So just to give you an idea of the detail, that if somebody would bother to, I went to the Arthur Freed collection at USC for months, and I just recorded all of this. But this is just to give you an idea of the detail, and this is just one set of production notes. There's another series, but this is July 19th, 1951. It was a Thursday, and it says, directors rehearsing boom moves with dance ins and setting new marks for camera. So Gene had a man who was his dance in. So Gene could be up on the boom watching and set the camera moves and the lighting moves. And so rehearse with principals to playback. So all the music is recorded prior and they're performing to playback. So that's from 9:25 to 9:27. Kelly complete final wardrobe from 9:27 to 9:29. Start rain for scene 9:29 to 9:32. Kelly changing pants due to loose cuff 9:32 to 9:34. Can you change your pants in 2 minutes? Okay. No. Okay, then put sawdust in puddle for effect 9:34 to 9:36. Shoot 1 take 9:35 to 9:48. Set added rain pipe, sweep excess water off streets from 9:48 to 9:56. Replace the practical light that had blown, which had failed, 9:56 to 10:14. And shoot 8 takes. 1 was no good for camera, 2, 3, 4, and 6 were no good for action. So imagine every single minute of every day is recorded in that detail. Wow. So let's just say, if a doctor is called to the set, as doctors were called in the I Build a Stairway to Paradise in American in Paris, because the stairs were so hot, the dancers started to pass out. But in Singin' in the Rain, Debbie Reynolds claims that her feet bled so much and a doctor had to be called to carry her off of the set. Well, it didn't happen. So did not happen so many of the stories. And I think what happens is that you have the performers, Debbie and Donald, they would do their own shows and tours, and they could get a laugh and they got a response out of audiences. And so and the more response they got, the more they built up. Debbie Reynolds put in her book that she put her gum under the rung of the ladder in Singin' in the Rain, and Gene danced by and it pulled off his hairpiece. And so she said he was so angry that he didn't speak to her for a year. Well, if you look at his head doesn't go under a rung, and B, you can tell. Can you imagine if his hairpiece came off in a scene? The detail, because there are in examples where the hairpiece had to be readjusted or hair had to be changed or whatever, and makeup changed and everything. So what bothers me is that those things go into books and then they get repeated, and they're so unnecessary. Because if you look at Debbie Reynolds' performance, it's amazing. She was perfect for the role. Gene chose her for the role. She says Louis B. Mayer chose her. He wasn't at the studio anymore. And Gene thought she was the perfect ingenue for the role. In fact, he said that it's kind of funny. It was as though Betty Comden and Adolph Green wrote the script for her, that because she was so much like this girl. And so it's just I find it troubling, because it's just such a waste of time to kind of, I'd rather talk about what really transpired, and because I really do think it's magic. I think what they did was phenomenal. And so I think I know that Debbie Reynolds in some accounts said that the experience changed her life and gave her a career. It made her a star. And I think those are pretty nice things to, you can take those. And Donald O'Connor, it was Gene. Donald O'Connor, as you see on this, there a lot of time is spent. This is from 9:56 to 10:14 is when they're replacing this light. So during that time, there's all this time that you have to kill. You're sitting around on this set. So Donald would pick up whatever was on the set and start playing with it. So if it's a dummy or whatever, and then and Gene's assistants, Jeannie Coyne and Carol Haney, would just break up. Everybody would crack up, and then they'd come in the next day and they'd go, "Donald, do that thing you did yesterday with the dummy," and he had no recollection of what he did. So Gene said to Jeannie, and Carol Haney said, write down what he does. And so they did. And then Gene took the elements and strung them together in the number. And then obviously a new number was written, which isn't entirely new, but based on something that had already been written. But Cole Porter didn't go after Arthur Freeman. But and then the only thing that Gene said, that Donald had grown up in the vaudeville circuit with his family, but by the end, when he does the black flip off of the wall, he had lost his confidence to do that. So they brought in his brother to help retrain for the flip and everything. But it's amazing. It's just leave it at that. That right there to me says it all. And if you look at Debbie's, Gene always choreographed to the woman. So if you look, he is choreographing to make Debbie look like a fantastic dancer. And you will also see that he positions his assistants and some of the top dance people next to her when she's performing. And you can see that she's looking over and watching, much as Donald is watching over in Moses Supposes. He's spotting Gene constantly in that number. So they're just little things that little bits and pieces, but I just think that and I think when you look at the color of it, I must say I was a little wary of the 4K version of it coming out. I thought, there have been some of those that have not been great, and restorations, and this one, I must say, it's beautiful. And I really did see things that I'd not seen before. You just notice so much, and on a big screen especially. So I think they did a good job. They finally went back to as close to the original as they could, because the original master was destroyed in a fire. But they went back as best they could and with the best technology, and I really think they got it. But where do you see that vibrant color? Where do you see, like in Gotta Dance, the magenta and the blue and the yellow, and I mean, it's wild what's going on.
And I think that's one of the things that makes it appealing to lots of different ages and of folks too, is that it's a visual spectacle as well. I mean, you mentioned it before, the script is great. Obviously the singing and the dancing are great, but then when you add in all the things like the color, it's so additive to the whole thing. It's I will want to check out the 4K edition to see how that comes across, because it's fun just to watch that.
Yeah, no, and I do think you're right. And the funny thing is that it's not all special effects. It's not all CGI.
No,
It's real
far
people.
from that. I mean, it's
real,
all practical and then some. I mean,
it's people dancing instead of adding in others. It's real terrific dancers. I mean, you've got a real slew of them coming out, and that opening of Gotta Dance, Gene always said that was he felt the best dancing he ever did on screen in just those few seconds of dance. So it's a spectacle with Broadway melody. And
How did Rita Moreno get involved in this film? Was that someone that Gene had found as well?
Well, yeah, and she credited him because that was the first time ever she was not typecast as a Latina. So she speaks very highly of Gene, and she said that she's not in many of the scenes. I mean, it is funny when she arrives and is noted, and then she is in the dance sequences. They go across at the producer's home, but she said that she went, even though she wasn't in the sequences, she went to watch the filming because it was so amazing. And she said Gene was in constant motion. She said he was behind the camera, then he'd leap down and be in front of the camera, then be back up in front, just constant motion. And thus answering the question, who is behind the camera? Well, it answers the question, who is behind the camera, who's setting those shots. So it's I appreciate that she says that about Singin' in the Rain, and I appreciate that Leslie Caron says it about American in Paris, that Gene was behind the camera, and I think he gets lopped off of that a lot. So.
Well, and when you look at, of course, he's the number one billed director of the two, and the credits, so it's obvious that he's the one guiding everything. How did he and Stanley Donen divide the duties, or who decided who would do what?
Well, and it's interesting that you mentioned that he's the first name director, because thanks to IMDb, now that changes, because they refuse, for whatever reason. I mean, why can't we get this changed? They refuse to list the directors alphabetically. They only will list them alphabetically. They will not list them as the proper credit. So as a result, very often now, when there's a screening of Singin' in the Rain, it says only directed by Stanley Donen, and that's not accurate. And it was Gene who brought Stanley Donen on as a second director. And I have letters here in the archives saying, are you sure that you want to name him as a second director? Because what he was really Gene's assistant to be behind the camera. So if Gene is in front of the camera, he needs somebody who can make sure that he's hitting his marks and the camera is hitting its marks, and they're in sync with the music. And so Stanley knew music, and he was not a dancer. And he did some dancing, but he was not a strong dancer, and he was not a choreographer. He couldn't choreograph, but he knew music, and he knew the camera if the camera hit its spot in time, and if Gene hit his, they'd gone over everything so carefully that he was able to say, yes, it's a go, or no, it's not. And same with Carol Haney and Jeannie Coyne. They were the three who would be behind the camera. So, but Gene was trying to give Stanley a leg up. He was trying to make it so that Stanley could be a director on his own. And he did. He facilitated that. But he doesn't get treated right about that. And that's a sad bit. But Stanley, for much of the time, lived at Gene's house. He slept on the couch, and they would come home. I mean, they were there early, by 8 a.m. at least, and then they were there till at least 5. Then they'd come home, have dinner. That's Carol, Jeannie, Stanley, Gene, and they come home. Then they go through all of the set numbers, everything that's set for the next day, and then they would often go into the entertainment at the house, the game, and the people singing the piano. So it would go like until 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning, and Gene would go leave everybody in the living room and go up and go to sleep for a couple hours and come back and get up and start again. So Stanley was instrumental. I mean, he was the eyes and ears behind the camera if Gene couldn't be, but what you see is what Gene choreographed, and not to be confused with it being choreographed by Stanley, but it doesn't diminish his contribution, because the camera operators did not know music, and they didn't know camera movement tied to musical beats. And that was the way Gene was able to accomplish what he did, because he had the camera move to musical beats. So somebody had to be counting that out and starting those 500-pound cameras to move and stop, so that the camera is moving and the dancer is moving, Gene's moving. So you have both these things that have to be absolutely synchronized. And the only way to do that was through music. And that's why it, and Stanley had served that role with CoverGirl, so that Gene was able to dance with himself. And so he was able to translate that when he went on the Town and Singin' in the Rain. But he definitely had in the movies that they shared, it was definitely, he was the second named. And I wish we could get IMDb to change that, but it's another odd thing on my list.
All right, I've got one. I feel like we're setting the record straight on a lot of different things, but one of the big myths, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that the title number, "Singin' in the Rain," that Gene had this fever when that was filmed. Was that something that was accurate? Was he under the weather when he was filming that?
That's just about the only true thing that you will read.
Okay, great.
But it is true. And so what the set is draped in black tarpaulin, and then they had rigging that they hung for the rain. And Gene said that what he would do is he would do the number, and then as they're resetting it and resetting the lights and the rain and everything and sweeping the street, he would go out of the tarpaulin and lie on the sidewalk and try to bake the fever out of him, because he had a temperature about 103.
Wow.
And but you don't notice that at all in the
No.
I think that's one of the things that I hear so many people that they don't show up to work and they don't do things because it's but he knew. I mean, he would take time off if he had to, if he knew he couldn't perform, but he was able to do it. And the other thing that you'll read that is true is that they did run out of water in Culver City, because at 5 o'clock, when everybody came home to take showers and water their lawns and everything, the water was so reduced that they had to call it for the day, and then they hung more rigging, and that went up. So those are two true things. That's not bad out of
Well, and that number, I mean, it's an understatement to say how perfectly staged it is. And if you listen to earlier versions of that song from the early talkie eras, it doesn't have the same impact because of the way that it's staged and the way that Gene gets into that number. And of course, they added that wonderful vamp at the beginning to help him get into the song. And it adds such a wonderful joy to that song, I feel like.
Well, and that's yes, if you watch there's a wonderful bit of Buster Keaton doing that number, and he's just sort of splashing in their line of people splashing. But I do have a letter here that and then that kind of leads into your comment about it. But it's this letter I received, and it's dated April 7th, 2003. It says, "Dear Mrs. Jean Kelly, my name is Alan. I am in the 4th grade at PS 86 in Jamaica, New York. My class and I watched your husband's movie, Singin' in the Rain. I didn't like your husband's movie. I found out that your husband's movie is short if it didn't have any dancing or singing. Maybe your husband could cut out the dancing and have just gotten to the point of the movie. Can't your husband just stop thinking about dancing? Your friend, Alan Palacios." I love this. I just think it's so I love that the teacher didn't stop this one. And so I wrote to Alan and I said, "Thank you for your letter. But in the case of Gene Kelly, I have to tell you that the singing and dancing play a role, and that's what distinguishes him from everyone who came before, because Gene is using the singing and dancing to tell the story. So the movement is conveying it." And I said, and "Sing in the Rain is probably your best example of that. And as you said, it was Roger Edens who gave Gene that miraculous vamp, because Gene's sitting there and he knew that if he just walked out, if he kissed Debbie Reynolds and he walked out and started singing, everybody's going to go, "That's really weird. Why is he just bursting into song?" So he's sitting there, and Roger Edens was at the piano, and he just plunked out that vamp that we all know. I mean, you hear that anywhere in the world and people recognize that. It's like maybe the opening of a Beatles song, maybe the opening of something from Wizard of Oz, but those few opening bars are it. And then that enabled Gene to begin to stroll and to begin to work his way into the number. So by the time he's singing and dancing and splashing in the rain and twirling, you're completely with him. And he has, without saying, I'm in love, this should bring you joy, he has conveyed it, and it's a universal language that's read around the world and understood. And so it was funny because Alan's teacher brought him to my show when I did it in New York at Symphony Space. I think he had turned 18 by then, and I always have thanked him, because it's given me such a nice way to pivot off into an explanation for what Gene was doing, how he really wished to change the look of dance on film, and to create this particularly American style of dance, and to take dancing literally out into the street. So when he choreographed it on the little screen in his head, he was also choreographing all those puddles that then had to be dug out, and he had to hit each one, and that camera had to move at the same time. And so yeah, I had another funny note that this is one Gene got. It said, "Dear Mr. Kelly, my name is Jim Hadley. My mother won't let me jump off the furniture. Why did your mother let you?" And I think it's great, because
that is,
everybody loves it when that couch turns. And, they're jumping up on the chairs, and I didn't notice it, and I probably shouldn't point it out, but if next time you watch that, look at how many times they went over on that sofa. You'll see the feet you've probably never noticed, but they did that quite a few times.
Well, and that's what I love so much about Good Morning. It's my other favorite beside the title song, and to see these three, very, certainly different levels of dance skill, but all three of them come together in unison so beautifully.
It's great. And as you say, I mean, Debbie's steps are a little bit different, but it's just fantastic, and it's just such a celebration. And again, the humor, the humility of it, of Gene thinking he's washed up, and they're trying to cheer him on, and then I do love one thing I really love is Debbie Reynolds' snort when she laughs, and she has a snort. I really think that's brilliant. I think it's one of her best lines when she's because it's so perfect. And then that whole thing where Donald is he's just the thing with the faces. I think I may have told you this, but that's Donald O'Connor's great contribution. And Jane always felt he was really an unsung hero, that he was one of the greatest comedians of all time, but doesn't really get as much recognition as Gene felt he should. And he said that for the Moses Supposes number, that Donald just inserted those faces. They weren't in the script, and he just started making those faces. And you'll see it at a point where Gene is just he's cracking up. He's kind of Donald just he did it, and then they put it in, and so that made its way in, and so you get this kind of infectious thing. And Gene did think that the Moses Supposes number was the best tap number that he ever did on film. He thought Eleanor Powell and Fred Astaire in Broadway Melody was the best that somebody else did, but Gene really thought that was. There's one other thing that you will read, one other story that Donald O'Connor told, which is that he sort of panicked because there's a question of which way someone turns, and a natural way to turn is right. Gene turned left, which is very unusual. So in his dancing, that he turned left. And fortunately for that number, they discovered that Donald O'Connor also turned left. And so they would have done it. I mean, they both could have made the adjustment, but the fact that they both turned, because it had to be so carefully synchronized, was an interesting thing. A couple things that I had never really noticed until had seen the movie about 4 million times. I noticed that when Gene arrives, with Gene Hagen, and he's such a hokey bum, he's just waving it. And I love the moment when he turns back to the paparazzi to make sure that they got his shot, that I had never really noticed, but that hokey smile and everything. And Gene's giving the always dignity line. I do love it when if you watch Donald looks over and just rolls his eyes, and that's a great moment in that. I do love the cake, when she bursts out of the cake, and well, if it isn't Ethel Barrymore, I mean, it's quite funny, and she just is so irritated, and then it is great when she flings the pie in Gene Hagen's face. And Gene Hagen, I mean,
yeah, talk about her. How did she come to this film? She's amazing, and obviously she gets nominated for the Academy Award for this. I mean, just she's wonderful. How did she come to the film?
I think she should have won. I mean, I think it went to Gloria Graham, but I think what Gene Hagen did, Gene said she was the glue that held the piece together, and he said that the selection of her was the only disagreement that he had with Arthur Freed and Stanley Donen. Gene insisted that it be Gene Hagen, and the other two did not think she was glamorous enough. So he had to run tests to prove that she could do it. And of course, she's just brilliant. And talk about, you have a film within a film within a film. Here you have Debbie Reynolds supposedly dubbing Gene Hagen's singing voice, but it's really Betty Noyce who is dubbing Debbie Reynolds' singing voice. And when you have Debbie Reynolds supposedly dubbing Gene Hagen's speaking voice, so when she says "until the stars turn cold," that's actually Jean Hagen's real speaking voice. She had this very resonant, rich voice, and Debbie did not have the vocal range to cover the songs, so the woman who often dubbed for people, Betty Noyce, did it for her. There was also a woman named Martha Mears who did it for, say, for example, Rita Hayworth in CoverGirl and things. But it's particularly funny in this movie because dubbing is so integral to the whole thing, that the fact that she's being dubbing the dubber, it's like you have to kind of follow that one a little bit. But I just think Jean Hagen is just brilliant. She's just, and when you do look at her in the straight pictures that she does, I mean, that's what I mean by, Academy Award winning performance. It's when you have that ability to go from something a straight, serious picture to something like what she does in this, and so much is in her looks and her little her just the look she makes when he tries to get her off the stage and she's kind of like trying to oh, Donnie, everything.
Yeah, but there's something about that performance that transcends skill, right? I mean, it's almost the same thing that the rest of the cast had in their ability to dance and move. It was just something innately. She got that character so well. It's just a brilliant performance.
Well, and I've seen stage versions of the show, and they add a solo for her, and it always hits me the wrong way because you have to have some sympathy for her. You can't dislike her. You have to kind of like her, even though she's being quite a rat, and I think that's really key, that she's not a despicable character. She's just like right there.
Yeah.
Right there. The party of the first, so that's me,
Yeah. Because when the curtain opens in the finale and everyone's laughing at her, you do feel for her in that moment.
Yeah, you just kind of get that she's just, but I love, one of my favorite things, that there's nothing between us, just air, and then I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. And I mean, it's just, there's so much. And I think it's hilarious that I've now started quoting the lines, because I've always laughed at people on Facebook and Instagram that they're not laughed at, but I've been amused that everybody knows all the lines. Everybody quote everything. And listen to me here. I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's just like they're so embedded in us now. And
yes.
She's got to talk into the bush. I can't make
off to a bush.
Off to a bush. I know, the woman, this is another little thing. These people that are in Singin' in the Rain are people that Jean got, who many of the people are people who were toward the end of their quote prime, or couldn't really get roles that they ordinarily would get, and so Jean has brought them in. One of them is the guy he hands the umbrella to at the end. That's a fellow by the name of Snub Pollard, and if you look up Snub, you'll see why he might be called Snub Pollard. And I mean, just a great actor, but not somebody who was getting roles at that time. Same with the policeman. The woman who is, as you're watching, Jean Hagen is getting her wig adjusted, and she's got the two women fussing around on her. The woman, as you're looking at the screen, the woman who is on the right, she's the woman with the grapefruit with Jimmy Cagney in the movie.
Public Enemy, yeah.
So, but nobody would recognize her in this.
Wow.
From the makeup person and that. So there are lots of people that Jean always was trying to bring in, people who may have been a little more down on their luck, not getting the roles that they used to get and everything, bring him into this experience, because you could obviously stick anybody in those pieces, but he would get some of those, and knew all of them. And so, and knew the crew, knew the people. I think the crew was excited because a lot of it, as you say, was stuff that they had started with and had evolved out of. So
Yeah.
the airplane motors it did take three, the equivalent of three airplane motors to suspend the white veil, the scarf dance. And those are called Ritter fans. You see one of them in the number that Gene does when he comes in and turns the light on in the set with Debbie Reynolds. The big fan is a Ritter fan. And so three of those. And then I have a great photo of Gene directing the Ritter fan operator, because Gene had to make sure that it hit his body, it hit Sid's body, and it shot that thing up into the air in sync with the music and their movement and the torque on his body. I mean, he's lifting Sid, and he said with that scarf going around, it was amazing. And not only for Gene, but you also see how strong the wind is on Sid. There's mythology about her outfit. And they're having to kind of paint in things because there was an indiscreet exposure. That's not true. And I actually have, I have her white dress from the scarf dress, and that isn't part of the costume. That would not be an accurate thing that happened. In the number that he does when she's in the green dress at the beginning and she's in the bobbed hair, he did deliberately make her out to be like Louise Brooks. Gene had a crush on Louise Brooks when he was little, and he loved the dark bobbed hair. And he said only he and Stanley Donen, he only let Stanley Donen in on that. But obviously, the green dress was cut like that, and the flapper dress, then they'd come in and measure the length of the skirt, and then Gene would slit it after so that he could have Sid extend the line of her leg. And there's one moment that you will see when she does flip her leg around, and there's one little blip. It's almost like there's just a little blip. And Gene said that the censors just went in and cut just a couple of frames out. There was nothing showing. It's just that they thought that was sensitive. What they did not cut out at MGM, but they cut out in other countries, was the white veil number. So the white scarf dress, which is lovemaking, it's about as mild as you're going to get for that act. But Spain cut that out. They figured out what Gene was up to. Similarly, they cut out the fountain scene with Leslie Caron, because that's also lovemaking. Can you imagine now with what we have to watch?
Yeah,
right. Go ahead, Brandon.
With the Broadway ballet, though, I'm thinking, An American in Paris comes out just a year before this, and it's so renowned for that ballet, and this ballet is so strikingly different. Was there sort of a, I don't know, sort of this unspoken pressure for them to have to live up to that, or was this just going to be totally different no matter what?
No, totally different. And I think they were, I think, surprised in a sense that Sing in the Rain, Gene said it came in not even a close second to American in Paris. It just didn't rise to that. The public liked it, but he said that Adolph Green was the one who really thought that it would have legs. He said Stanley Donen didn't like the movie and didn't think it would like. But he said Adolph Green believed in it. But Broadway Melody was not supposed to be what it is, because it was supposed to be Gene and Donald O'Connor doing the number, and then Donald had a previous commitment and had to leave, and so they had to bring Sid Charisse in, and which was, I mean, Gene loved it because here he gets this gorgeous classical dancer. But he said it was really difficult because she was only used to being on point, and he had to break her being on point and get her down. I mean, it's a very we to some degree had it even with the Scottish ballet dancers doing Jean's recent ballet, because they're so used to being upright and in a vertical position, and so for them to break the line and to come down to the ground and to wiggle their hips and to do this kind of very sensual sexual thing was anathema. And that was Jean said that it was really Carol Haney and Jeannie Coyne who worked with Sid. They also trained Debbie Reynolds every day, so it was really, they were the ones working with these people. And a man by the name of Ernie Flatt came in to teach Debbie tap. Ernie Flatt worked on he was well known with a lot of the television specials, things that the great women who had television specials and things, that he was the great tap teacher. But Sid then did this, and then you see Sid's style changing after that, because then Sid can go on and do Bandwagon, and it really made her a star. Before that, she was just typecast as the ballerina kind of in the background, and this made her an overnight sensation. Really, she became, I mean, she's gorgeous, and as Jean said, those legs just went on for miles. So she's really, and she was always very gracious about Jean and the contribution that he made. So I've always appreciated that.
Patricia, I wanted to ask you, because this being the 70th anniversary of this movie, I'm sure you've been talking about it all year long, but now we're getting close to the end of the year and the holiday season's here. So if you wouldn't mind changing gears a little bit and just telling us what the holidays looked like for you and Jean. Were there special traditions? Were there things that you recall from those holidays that you'd like to share?
Yes. And a good friend of mine, we went out to dinner the other night, and her husband just died, and she said, I'm not going to do anything for Christmas, and I'm not putting out decorations or anything. She said, have you put out anything? And I said, I have not done anything since Jean died. So, and Christmas was huge for us. It was, well, let's say it was quite hilarious. And I told her, I said, yeah, it was great. I said, Jean sat on the couch with a vodka tonic, and we had Nat King Cole and Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby and Andy Williams singing Christmas carols on the stereo. And we always went out together and picked out our tree. We would drive to one of the tree lots and get a tree, which was, I kind of missed that. And now the tree lots are gone from here. I remember a Norse pine. I still have the label for it. And I started unpacking. I had packed up all of these decorations. Jean got quite a few from people, even from a set of wooden clown figures he got from one of the Zampirla family that appeared in his show Clown Around, and each thing had some meaning. And so I decorated the tree while Jean sat drinking vodka tonic. So he loved it. He called me Mrs. Claus, and then he would, the precision involved. I mean, we had these wreaths of holly, and they had to be holly with white tips on the leaf, and they were just simple 12-inch in diameter. I have the measurements upstairs in the archives, but they had to hang by a ribbon exactly in a certain point on the wooden panel to the left and right of the fireplace. I mean, they had to be the right size. They had to hang exactly in the right space. I mean, it was really, really fun, and really, Jean always liked Andy Williams. He thought he was the best of the that little choir boy was the best singing the Christmas hymns and things, and Jean would sing along, and it was just and then he would always he really couldn't wait, so by the time it turned midnight, then he would always have wanted to open presents because he was like a little boy. He couldn't wait. So I got lovely things that you wouldn't ordinarily even think about. I mean, one was a skirt lifter. It was a vintage piece, and it was what he saw an ad in the New Yorker magazine for this antique seller selling the Victorian skirt lifter, and it's what women would attach to your skirt. So when you walked across, say, a puddle or something, then it would lift up your skirt. Completely, like, don't think that it was diamonds and stuff coming. No, it was things like a skirt lifter, which I think is fabulous, but it's not what people think, when you think, oh, what's going to go through a catalog for a Beverly Hills gift. That was not Jean's style at all, but it was, oh God, I miss it. And I want some time to, I even wanted to do it in Paris this year, but we didn't get it worked out. But I wanted to unpack the decorations again, and I wanted to do it with kids there, and I wanted to have the music playing, and I wanted to decorate a tree and maybe get a special ornament for Jean or something. But I'll have to, that'll be my something I do for next year. But what we gave as gifts were the Waterford crystal ornaments.
Mm-hmm.
So say to the Sinatras, and they had a year, so it would be 1990, 1991, so yeah, so those were, yeah, it was really, one day I'll do Christmas again. It's all saved. It's all packed and saved and everything. I didn't get rid of anything, but I just, the idea of doing it here, I'm afraid my house is so discombobulated that I kind of need to get my home in order a bit. And I can't light a fire here because of the archives. So I can't. I miss that because we had a fireplace that was double-sided. So it was, if you lit it, it was in our dining room and in our living room. And so much of it I just miss. I miss those nights and that music on the stereo. But it doesn't go away. And I'm actually going to write about it because it was such a big part of and it was just a really lovely time of year.
We appreciate you sharing that very much.
Yeah. How was your last time we spoke? You were in the midst of trying to complete the book. How is that coming?
Oh, how did that go? Well, that didn't. I think that turned into a ballet and an radio series and a scarf and. So yeah, so I keep thinking. I thought, well, okay, so now I can start on it again this coming year. I've been saying that I hope to get the book out in 2024, and I think that's a reasonable expectation, a reasonable demand. What I need to do is put the same demand on myself that I did to get the radio series and those other things out. I just need to. The problem is finding compartmentalized time. I did the radio series well because I was sitting alone in a hotel room in Paris. I only left for just moments. I'm the only person who's gone to Paris and never left their hotel room. And I just had Jean on the headset and I was listening to him talking to me. It's like he's right there, sitting there. And I hadn't listened to those for 30 years. But I just was I'd run down for breakfast and then I'd grab an extra baguette and some cheese and I'd run upstairs and that would be lunch. So I need to kind of do the same thing. And I've been bad because I say yes. I say yes to people like you.
Well, we really, really appreciate it. Well, and I don't mean to add more distractions, but are there other things before you get the book out there? Are there more tours that are going on, anything like that? What else have you got in the future here?
Oh, well, yes. So, I'm going to London next week and I'm speaking at the Victoria and Albert Museum on December 1st. and I'm going to be talking. They have a special exhibition about the musical, and a lot of people related to Jean are represented. Matthew Bourne, Les Brotherston, the man who did the design for the ballet. Just a lot of people are in there. The V&A actually they have the maquettes from Jean's circus shows, the clown around that he did. He was way ahead of his time for that. So that's coming up. And then in March 17th, 18th, and 19th, the big live symphonic show is back on the road. So
wonderful.
Yeah, finally. Gene Kelly, Alive in Music, is with the Seattle Symphony, and the tickets are already on sale for that. So I really hope people will get there, and there'll be 2 evenings and then a matinee for that. And then my hope is that then we'll begin to just roll that out and get the bookings for the one-woman show back up again, and the symphonic show. And then I'm working with a really wonderful woman named Hilary Palanza with the Museum of Dance, which is where the archives are going to go when I kick the bucket. So the archives will go up into the cloud and be available in perpetuity for everyone around the world. So we're just in the process now of working with the tech designers and with who will help manage the data, and also the scanning, the proper sizing of all of the scans, everything, 3-dimensional modeling of some things, and also make it so that, you know how you create platforms and then the next year you can't access them because the technology is not. So we've been promised that it will go on in perpetuity and it will be updated, and then the objects themselves will be in a brick and mortar storage in preservation. So the photographs, manuscripts, costumes will all be preserved. And I've left instructions so that all of the items can be used, and there'll be curators all around the world for the Museum of Dance. It's an international collection that's being built. And so my instruction is that anyone, the curators can, for example, say they wanted to do a pop-up exhibition in Paris of Jean and Clown Around, let's just say. So they would have access to the photographs, the manuscripts, the music, the video footage, the film footage, and they would be able to work with the people in Paris then to make that happen. And then meanwhile, with hope, I'll live long enough to be able to curate all the items that are going up into the cloud so that I'll be able to identify all the photographs. Then you'll hear Jean's voice describing things. I'll be describing things, trying to connect as many dots as possible. And my goal, our goal, is that it may be a board, it may be I'm not quite sure how but I kind of see it as constellations, as sort of stars. I've always seen Jean is cut out in little stars like the Shakespeare, that say if somebody came in, say if a young kid came in and they pushed on Jean's star, it would radiate out to Bill Robinson, to Bojangles, and you would see the connection between Jean and Bojangles, and you'd learn that Bojangles' steps are in the iconic Singin' in the Rain number. And you would go to Alvin Ailey and learn that watching Gene Kelly was what inspired Alvin Ailey. You would go to Buster Keaton, and see how Gene was influenced by Keaton. You'd see ball players, you'll see choreographers, dancers, obviously writers who were inspired Jean, and so this whole sky essentially will be illuminated, and you'll be able to see how widespread the breadth of Jean's, the many dimensions of the man, and how he managed to touch or be touched by so many, and it goes on. So you'll see all the Dancing with the Stars people, the Derek Hoffs, the Hugh Jackmans, the Billy Crystals, and everything. So I got a lot of work to do, I guess. Or else I have to live a really long time, and my brain has to stay intact. So.
Well, we don't think you have anything to worry about. We're so happy every time you come to visit us, and thank you so much for the work that you do for people like us who are just fascinated by this stuff.
Well, will you do me a big favor, and will you check in with me again next year, and just I always want to chat with you. Just do me a favor and pop back in, and we'll find a good time and a good subject to talk about.
Well, absolutely. And I was thinking about anniversaries. I think next year is the 75th anniversary of The Pirate, which I love. I would love to talk about a little bit.
I love The Pirate.
Yes. So, yes,
okay.
thank you. And yes, and if you make it out with your shows to the Midwest, we definitely want to see you in person.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, let's make that happen. Let's make it happen. We need to connect a few dots because it needs to be. I mean, why not? That's calling. I just haven't quite had time to connect everything. So if you have any ideas on that, do let me know.
Absolutely. I'll we'll get in touch with you then.
Okay. Oh, sorry. I'll see you for The Pirate next year.
Absolutely.
Have a lovely holiday.
You as well. Thank you so much.
And I would say that was another incredible conversation with Patricia.
I'd agree with that 100%. I mean, she is obviously a very busy person. So for her to give our little podcast some time, we can't say thank you enough to her. She could be over in Europe discussing this film, and she deigned to give us a little over an hour, and it was wonderful.
She is. She's one of those guests that I think has a special place in both of our hearts because she was our first big interview, and she really helped open the doors for a lot of things. So,
and gosh darn it, if she didn't invite herself back.
Yes,
it's not too shabby either.
yes. And I took my chance because I love The Pirate. I think it's an underrated movie, and I think it would be fun to talk about. And Eric, I think one of these days you and I are going to get to meet her in person. I think we'll will that to happen.
Fantastic. Let's make it happen.
Yeah. So we hope you enjoyed it. I know that we did. And as always, there's never a bad time to watch Singin' in the Rain. So
I agree.
Just do it. It's and if you haven't seen, I'm usually not one to pick on people for not seeing movies, but if you haven't seen Singin' in the Rain, shame on you. I will just say. So yeah, go ahead and view it. It's not necessarily a holiday movie, but really does encapsulate the joy of the holiday season.
It's a feel good. It's for any time. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So that will do it for this episode. We've got a great December coming up here. We after this interview, you'll hear a couple of great conversations. We're going to welcome back Emmett Stanton, who joined me and Allison Maycor to discuss Ball of Fire a couple of months ago. He's going to be joining Eric and I to discuss The Thin Man, which is a great movie. It's a movie that a lot of people usually tend to watch around New Year's, mainly I think because a lot of alcohol is imbibed in those movies. but no, it's going to be a great conversation because it's one of my favorites.
We're watching the original, right? Because there's a series, right.
It spawned 5 sequels, really one of the first film franchises, even though they didn't refer to them as franchises back then. But a great comedy. And then my friend Kelly Lorenz is going to come back on, and she and I are going to discuss The Shop Around the Corner, which is one of those great underrated Christmas movies, and a movie that also spawned, not a franchise, but spawned several incarnations, which the most recent one being You've Got Mail, with Tom Hanks and Meg Ryan.
Yep.
So that will be a fun discussion, and then Eric and I will be back again to wrap up the year and discuss our end of year segment, and that's always a fun episode. And then that'll do it for 2022. So it's crazy.
It is.
But I think that'll do it for this episode of Front Row Classics. As always, you can find us on Facebook at Front Row Classics Podcast, on Twitter at FRN Classics, Instagram at FRN Classics Pod, And as always, you can email us at classicsfrn@gmail.com. We've gotten some great suggestions this year, but we just, there's been so many great movies suggested, so many interviews that pop up. I've made a list and we'll definitely squeeze the ones that have been recommended into 2023. So that will definitely happen. So
yes, so thank you to everyone that's doing that. We will get to them, and keep listening. We appreciate it.
Yep. So for this episode of Front Row Classics, I'm Brandon.
And I'm Eric.
And we will see you in the front row.